This week on Q&A, our guest is Thomas Sowell, Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution.
Thomas Sowell, you said in an interview with American Enterprise Institute some time ago, after quoting Eric Hoffer as saying, intellectuals cannot operate at room temperature. You said, there always has to be a crisis, some terrible reason why their superior wisdom and virtue must be imposed on the unthinking masses.
Yes. You can go back over the last 100 years. You can go back to eugenics in the early part of the 20th century. You can go back to Keynesian economics. You can come forward to the environmental movement. There always is something which requires them to substitute their wisdom and virtue for our lack of understanding.
Aren't you an intellectual?
Oh, I suppose I've been accused of so many things. There's no, I don't say all intellectuals.
What is an intellectual?
I guess the best definition I've heard is from Hayek. He says it's a second-hand dealer in ideas. That the vast majority of intellectuals don't really originate any ideas, but they peddle ideas that other people have originated. And that gives them a great deal of freedom because ideas are so malleable, words are so malleable. Reality is not malleable. And so they can believe in all sorts of things which have no realistic possibility and which have failed time and again in history. But because they know how to rephrase it and repackage it, they can just keep right on going.
If I read correctly, you're going to be 75 this year.
Yes.
How many years have you been thinking and writing?
Oh, gosh. I've been published since 1960.
Has it changed at all, the way you learn?
Gosh, not really. I mean, I learned both from reading and from experience. And of course, what I believe has changed radically since I was a Marxist in my 20s. I'm surprised, though, when I go back, because I keep old letters and things, I'm surprised how many of the values I had are still the same values. It's just that now I see that they have to be reached by an entirely different method.
What method?
Well, at one time, for example, I thought that if the government took control of various things, they could do a lot, particularly for people who are poor, less fortunate one way or another. Over time, I've learned that that really does not work. I mean, it sounds better, it doesn't work. Just recently, I came across one number which should have destroyed the whole notion of central planning, and it was that there were 24 million prices in the Soviet Union. Now, there's no human being capable of setting 24 million prices properly, especially when you realize that each price has to be set properly in relation to the other 24 million prices. So you can't even break it down and have, say, 24,000 people, each one with 1,000 prices, because the point is they all have to mesh relative to one another. But if you have a country of a couple of 100 million people, and each person keeps track of only a relatively few prices that affect that person, then it can work.
We're at the Hoover Institution. What is it?
Hoover Institution is a think tank. Established originally just as an archive for all the tons of material that Herbert Hoover collected when he was traveling around Europe after the First World War, during a time of starvation, where he set up this program to feed millions of people across Europe. And when he came back, he dumped all this stuff here at Stanford and set up this archive. And then at some point, Glenn Campbell, one of the directors, decided to turn it into a think tank, and he put it on the map as that.
How long have you been here?
It'll be 25 years in September.
What's life like here for you?
In a sense, I shouldn't even be answering that because I am here so seldom. I work at home miles away, but that's part of the great part of the freedom of the place. I mean, right now, if you ask the director of the Hoover Institution, what is Tom Sowell working on? He'd say, darned if I know. You know, from time to time, they find out what I'm working on, and if they like it, I continue to stay on. I suppose if they went a couple of years and I did nothing, they'd say, why is he here? But it's really a wonderful place, and I've had the most productive years of my life here.
Has your relationship with your readers changed much?
Not that I can think of. Most of the stuff I get from readers is really very positive, very reinforcing. Some of it's very touching. Occasionally you'll get a barrage of criticism on something. I had one recently where there's some internet website that is sicking them on me because I said there's no such thing as a trickle-down theory. Nobody has ever advocated it. And there were all storms of email came in, not one of which contained one quote from one person who had actually advocated it. It's one of those things that someone says that he objects to in someone else, but we can never find the someone else who's supposed to have said it.
In reading a little bit of your personal autobiography, there was a scene where you were on top of the World Trade Center a number of years ago.
Oh, yes.
Having a dinner. Do you think about that often in light of 9/11?
Oh, that's chilling. It's chilling, yeah. I was having dinner with a man that I worked for decades earlier in a machine shop in New York. It's really the low point of my life. And I didn't have enough money to ride the New York subway, which was 5 cents in those days. And so I would walk from the Brooklyn Bridge up to Harlem because I didn't have the subway fare. And when I got paid, they held back a couple of days, which normally doesn't mean anything, but when you're in that position, it means a lot. And so I had to ask him to borrow some money so I'd have something to eat with. And he lent me $5, which was real money in those days. And so when I came back there, and I was looking out of the hotel window that I was in, and I looked over to where I used to work, and I thought about him, and I phoned him. And he brought his family, and we ate dinner at the top of the World Trade Center. And it was really one of the best evenings of my life. And he and I were both on the verge of tears when we parted. It was just a wonderful time.
A number of years later, of course, 9/11. What's
Yeah.
the impact of 9/11 on this country and the world?
Oh my gosh, we will never be the same again. I'm disappointed in people who seem not to realize that it's not business as usual anymore. That it's really, there are things we have to do that we don't want to do, but the alternative is far worse. And so the world will never be the same. I hope that it wakes up some people. It certainly hasn't awakened all of them.
What should change in this country even more than it has?
I think there shouldn't be these irresponsible statements that are made about the world situation. Things like, you know, we're having a backdoor draft, things to undermine the troops who are out there. I'm appalled that the troops in battle with their lives on the line are being tried now as criminals for actions that they took when they had to make a split-second decision with their life at stake. And when I think of all the excuses that are made for common criminals, you know, he had an unhappy childhood, he ate Twinkies, whatever, you know, and these men are out there fighting, putting their lives on the line for us, and we're sitting back here second-guessing.
Why? What's causing the second-guessing?
For some people, it's politics, but for other people, it is just sheer unthinking reflection, reaction. You know, gee, you shouldn't have done this or you shouldn't have done that. It's like the people who second-guess the police when there's a shooting and they say, why do the police fire so many shots? Now, as you know, I taught pistol shooting in the Marine Corps. I'm not the least bit surprised that they fired all those shots and so many of them missed. That's what happens with pistols. But to think that someone who has never had a gun in his hand is criticizing someone for what he did and is sitting back in air-conditioned comfort someplace, you know, second-guessing this guy who had his life on the line and who put his life on the line to protect him.
What kind of marks would you give President Bush?
High marks.
For what?
For thinking long-term. I mean, take one example of Social Security. Whatever you think about his particular plan and his arguments you can make back and forth, the fact is he knows Social Security is not going to run out of money while he's president. The easiest thing in the world would be for him to say, forget it, it is someone else's problem somewhere down the road. You know, but he understands that the longer we wait, the worse it's going to get, and therefore we ought to take it on. I think the same thing with terrorism. You know, he could have stopped in Afghanistan, he could have done this, he could have done that. But the fact is he realized that the fact that we stop doesn't mean that they're going to stop.